This episode of Real Ag Radio is brought to you by high-performing new Carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer today.
It's time for Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. Real Ag Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with Real Ag Radio. Welcome to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making Real Ag Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And of course, a big shout out as well to everybody listening out there on the Real Ag Radio podcast. Really appreciate your listenership, and this show just continues to grow in audience, and thank you so much to everybody that spreads the word to all their family and friends and farming and ranching neighbors. Today on the show, we've got a great one for you. We're going to be talking to Timothy Caulfield. He is, Dr. Timothy Caulfield, I should say. He is a professor at the University of Alberta. He's also an author. And we've had him on the show before. He does a great job of debunking some of the science myths that are out there. Written several books as well, talking about some of the pseudo-scientific myths. And one of my favorite is as far as the one about Gwyneth Paltrow, who was just on trial. Right. That took up a lot of the pop culture time as of late, for sure. We're also going to hear today a conversation with Greg Northey. He is with Pulse Canada. There were a number of things that were in the budget last week that mentioned transportation. Pulse Canada very, very much on the transportation file. They weren't some of the big numbers, in terms of, like, say, $330 million for dairy research. They were more in terms of providing areas of focus on what needs to happen with transportation. Now, if we're going to be a serious exporter, and we should be thinking about being a serious exporter of agricultural products, transportation logistics are very, very important. We're going to cover some of those things in the budget, including interswitching with Greg Northey, and we'll also have time today for the top ag news stories of the day. If you have feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as TikTok. Or you can call the Real Ag feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Now, speaking of the budget, we got a new poll up at realagriculture.com. And the poll is about the budget. And the question is, the federal government's budget has a $40 billion deficit without a plan to return to a balanced budget. And then we ask you what your opinion is of that. So, you are really concerned about Canada's financial future, you are understanding times are tough globally, or you are indifferent, I really don't follow politics. You can vote, and a lot of people have already. The poll just went up, and people are... Yeah, wow. It's not going to surprise you how the poll is going, but I want to have your vote on this. It's a free poll, fun, interactive. Go to realagriculture.com, scroll down, and you can vote in the poll. And clearly, what we saw in the budget is, and I know this is a cheap shot, it's the joke that keeps on giving, budgets don't balance themselves. They don't. We're finding that out here in Canada, and well, there's a lot of countries that are having a hard time balancing the budget as of late. And it's part of the issue, honestly, is that people don't feel that friendly towards cuts. Telling somebody, even adults, you think about it, you try to teach your kids about spending and dealing with the word no. Right? And we try to do that as parents, and we talk about this all the time. Now, on the same hand, adults being told no, that there could potentially be cutbacks, it is taken in political, it's used against governments. And so that's kind of where we are, where we just keep on spending. And at some point, you think it's going to catch up with us. It hasn't. Well, in some ways it hasn't yet, but I think I would definitely vote on the concerned about Canada's financial future, I think. That'd be the way I would vote that way. But I want to get your vote in. Go to realagriculture.com and vote in our poll. When we come back, we're going to get to the conversation with Dr. Timothy Caulfield right after this. It's now time for a product spotlight with Alpine, and we're joined by Steve McQueen. Steve, talk about Alpine BioK.
What it does for us is it allows us to increase metabolism within the plant. Using the acetate, how it enters into the energy basis within the plant, not only does potassium increase ATP energy, but the acetic acid, the acetate itself, allows that plant to pick up a metabolism, which will increase the ability for plants to exudate into the soil, and in turn allow plants to use the nutrients from the soil and move them much more efficiently within the plant. We increase the microbial activity in the soils, and we know that it's a food source for them. And when you energize the soils and the microbials, you then take advantage of your compost, your manures, your dry fertilizer programs. And what we're able to do is just create a synergy, upregulate the plant, and we can use the nutrients to their utmost efficiencies.
Hey, Steve, if somebody wants more information, where do they go?
www.alpine.com or contact the DSM all across Canada.
Farming is one of the most demanding jobs in the world, which is why farmers deserve an advantage. The Pride Seeds Advantage. For maximum yield, tonnage, and return on investment, get best-in-class seed genetics together with industry-leading traits and seed treatment protection. Plus, you can work directly with the Pride Seeds team to get personal agronomy guidance and products designed to help you take full advantage of your seed's genetic potential. Visit your local dealer today or visit prideseeds.com to learn more.
This segment of Real Ag Radio is brought to you by Heads Up Seed Treatment. Protect your beans from rhizotonia root rot, white mold, and SDS with Heads Up. Visit your nearest AgroMart location or visit headsupst.com to learn more. That is headsupst.com to learn more.
Bernard Tobin here at the Grain Farmers of Ontario March Classic, catching up now with Dr. Timothy Caulfield. You know him as a professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Alberta, well-known author. You know, The Science of Celebrity. Is Gwyneth Paltrow wrong about everything? And Relax, a guide to everyday health decisions. Tim, thanks for taking some time for Real Agriculture. Always great to have you back.
Thanks for having me on. So much to talk about in this space right now, am I right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And hey, you're talking today in your presentation about the infodemic, misinformation, and we really started with, it's been around a while. I mean, we can go back to, Dr. Oz, Gwyneth. Well, obviously, you spent some time with her.
It really has been around for a long time. We can go back even decades. I mean, you know that. But I feel like over the past 10, 15 years, and really over the last 5 years, it's accelerated. And by accelerate, I mean both the amount of misinformation out there, and also the impact that misinformation is having on beliefs and behaviors. So, yeah, I argue it's one of the defining issues of our time.
Yeah, and you mentioned the speed at which information is moving as well.
Yeah, it's incredible. So we've done a couple of studies where we've looked at how fast misinformation emerges, and we did one study where we looked at, there was an event that happened, WHO announcement, and we wanted to get a sense of how quick misinformation emerged, and it was like that day, and it's like hardcore conspiracy theories. This isn't people debating, reasonable scientific, like hardcore conspiracy theories emerging out of the ether instantaneously.
And you shared some research here today about, it's a real problem. And one survey, basically, misinformation ranking behind climate change.
Yeah, I think this is, as I said, one of the defining issues of our time. And in that survey, it was a big survey, in 19 countries, thousands and thousands of participants, and they put it right behind climate change as the greatest threats to humanity right now. I mean, that's where we are.
Yeah. Hey, talk about, social media here. One of the, the big challenges here. 2 billion people on TikTok getting, there are all kinds of information, including their news and information about everything from food and wellness.
Yeah, social media has been a game changer. I know it's a truism to say, and that's not a hot take. I think everyone knows that. But I don't think we can underemphasize how true that is, and increasingly so, especially with the rise of entities like TikTok, where, as you said, over 2 billion people are on TikTok, and it's not just entertainment, not just dance videos. People are getting their news and information from TikTok, and about 20, depending on the study you look at, anywhere between 20 and 50% of the content on there has some degree of misinformation. So the one study came out, said about 20%, and for some topics like vaccines, as much as 50% misinformation.
And then we have pop culture and celebrities, and some of your favorite football players, like Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers.
That's right, and I bring up, as you know, I love studying pop culture and its impact on the things that we think about. And a lot of people think it's frivolous and they kind of laugh it off, but we know. And there has been more and more studies that have shown this. They really do have an impact because they kind of frame what we talk about. So Gwyneth Paltrow, Tom Brady, and Aaron Rodgers, they talk about things, and even if we don't believe them, they generate public discussion around these topics and invite people to at least consider what their perspective, which is often permeated with misinformation.
And more fear-mongering, more anxiety, more anger.
Yeah, I think fear-mongering, I'm sure you would agree with this, is a huge part of your industry, right? The fear-mongering around pesticides, around GMOs, it's been, with us for decades. But we're seeing more and more of it, and we're seeing it spread on the social media platforms. And one of the interesting things I didn't talk about is how the misinformation clusters, right? So, they'll believe misinformation about the microchip, and it's the same community that's going to believe the misinformation about GMOs. And it didn't always used to be like that, right? You're starting to see these communities cluster around the misinformation, and unfortunately it becomes part of their ideology and their personal belief system, and it can be very difficult to change those people's minds when that happens.
Yeah. So you mentioned obviously agriculture, food, big challenges, misinformation, everything from crop protection products, pesticides, how we manage livestock. How do we tackle it? I mean, you and I have had this conversation in the past, and it's an evolving conversation. Where are we at now? I mean, what do you recommend to farmers and people you talk to all the time?
Well, I think farmers are in a great position. I'm an optimist, as you know, and I think I've said this every time I've talked to you. I think that the farming community can play a really important role. Debunking not only stuff about their own products, right? So, whether it's grain or whether it's dairy products, but also playing a role in the broader conversation, because people, they trust farmers. They want to hear from farmers. And I think they can play a role here. And so what can they do? I know it doesn't feel like this is true, but providing the good science makes a difference. Getting it out there, it really can make a difference, especially if you package it in a way that's shareable, that's entertaining. So great farming images, great farming stories, and use that as the entry point to the good science, and you can make a difference.
Yep. You also talked about the need, not only for our community and everybody here, the need for critical thinking skills, and sort of the emphasis on that, and teaching those skills.
Yeah, I think long term, this is going to be one of the core solutions, right? And by long term, I mean generational, right? We've got to teach kids, right, from kindergarten forward, critical thinking skills. And I want to be really careful here. I'm not talking about, picking what's right or wrong, right? Because, that can have an ideological component to it. That can be polarizing. I'm talking about giving, kids the tools to make those decisions themselves, right? And the countries like Finland have shown that can work, and there have been a lot of studies done around the world that show that can work. So critical thinking skills, media literacy, so important.
Yeah. One of the questions from the floor here was about ChatGPT, the new artificial intelligence we're all talking about, and where that could take this misinformation, and I guess to a new level, or how we manage it. You've been obviously studying this as something new, obviously that will keep you fueled for a while. What's your take on that?
I think it's terrifying. As I said, I'm an optimist always. And this is one of those topics that really does scare me, because it is so powerful, it is so realistic, and in fact, I even think that some of the commentators are underplaying its power, and I'm really like that. I think there's so much hype out there about both harms and benefits of things, and this is one of the things that I don't think is being hyped enough, because the harm is real. It's real. I don't know if you've seen some of the content that comes from this. Immediately, there's content that looks authentic, it looks real, and it can be very persuasive. So short term, I think the answer is it's reason for all of us to have our critical thinking skills amped up to 11, right? Because we should check with other sources to verify content that we see, because when something comes across our radar and it looks that real, it looks that authentic, it's easy to believe, and it's not always the truth.
Hey, in your presentation today, you talked about a new group that you're involved in, Together Against Misinformation. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's called #ScienceUpFirst, and it's a social media initiative that I started with Senator Stan Kutcher, but now I'm just an advisor on it. And the goal is to go where science misinformation resides, which is on social media. So we're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. Come be part of the Science Up First team. We would love to have more people from the agricultural community to be part of this. All you have to do is join and share and comment and ask questions and provide advice. We'd love to have people involved.
Hey, final question, and that is to you as the first guest on the original Real Agriculture Book Club. You're signing a new book or another book today. Tell us a little. Give us a plug for the book.
So the book I'm working on today is called Relax, and it was really called Relax, Damn It, in the hard copy. And the gimmick of this book is that it takes place over a day, and I sort of analyze all the decisions that we make throughout a typical day, from waking up to drinking coffee to having breakfast. I have a big section on milk, by the way, debunking the myths about milk, and I have a big section on gluten-free, debunking the myths around gluten-free. And I kind of unpack all those decisions. And the reason I structured it like that is I wanted to make it relatable, right? Our information environment is so noisy. We could all, be confused. I know I'm confused, and I do this for a living. So I thought that was a relatable way to kind of talk about these daily decisions, big and small. Toilet seat up or down, by the way, gets a whole chapter on toilet seat up or down. I hope that people find it useful.
Awesome stuff, Tim. Really appreciate you making time for Real Agriculture. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me. I hope we can do it again soon.
That was Dr. Timothy Caulfield of the University of Alberta. A lot of stuff to unpack there from Byrne's interview with Dr. Caulfield, but, he talks about critical thinking, and young people. As you know, if you've been listening to this show on a daily basis, I recently have been able to talk to two different universities, Iowa State and last week at the University of Lethbridge. And I very, very much agree with Dr. Caulfield in the sense that we really need to teach critical thinking skills. I think if you look at society in general, it's something that's kind of a little bit lacking. People getting kind of caught in their echo chamber, especially when we think about things politically, especially when we think about things related to what we believe to potentially be true. It's okay to listen to all sides of opinion on an issue. And I've been telling the students this in the sense that you think about politics. And if you're listening to this show on Sirius XM, it's okay to listen to a little bit of Fox News. It's okay to listen to a little bit of MSNBC, take in some CNN. Maybe you check out some of the other political stations on Sirius like POTUS 124. And you may not agree. In fact, if you do that, you will not agree with all the different positions that you're going to hear on the politics of the day. But it allows you to actually maybe question some of the things that, your hard, fast opinions and really apply some okay, well, that's interesting. And maybe it sparks the ability for you to ask some questions potentially too and seek out further information on a topic. That is something that has really, really been missing. What we do now is we search for those opinions and perspectives that really, really agree with what ours are. That's called confirmation bias. And you hear me say all the time at the beginning of the show, at the end of the show, I want to hear from you. And there's lots of you. We read an email yesterday where somebody said, actually, Sean, I really like the show, but I disagree. And here's why. Here's some things that maybe you missed. Well, that's perfect. That allows us for us to learn. And I could slough it off and say, well, yeah, whatever. But here's what I believe to be true. Or I could say, that's interesting information. I'm going to take that information, critically think about it, and maybe apply it, how it changes and molds my perspective going forward on the topic. So I think he is very, very, and that there's so many topics where this carries over, especially when it comes to the science of trade and things like that, as we try to, gain more market access. You think about the CPTPP deal that we talked about on Friday's show, we're going to get to in the news, or we talked about yesterday on the news, when it was talking about how, the UK doesn't believe in the carcass washing that Canada does, even though all of our customers around the world do. It's stuff like that where we really could apply some critical thinking for sure. Hey, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more Real Ag Radio. We're talking to Greg Northey of Pulse Canada right after this.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on realagriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
We are right here on the trade show floor at Commodity Classic. We got a product spotlight with Azotic, and right now we're talking to Tom Trigano. Tom, what does Envita do?
So Envita is a nitrogen-fixing bacteria that can fix nitrogen in all kinds of different crops. So beyond corn, which is the main focus for us, but we can fix nitrogen in everything from wheat to soybeans, and even some of the high-value crops like potatoes and sugar beets. What's unique about it is it fixes nitrogen right inside the cells of the plant. So we're not talking about, it's not inside the roots, so it's a foliar or an in-furrow application, and it gets basically systemic from the leaves to the roots, which gives the guys a lot of flexibility on how they use it.
If growers are interested in Envita from Azotic, where do they find it?
Best place to go is to talk to your local retailer. Another way to contact us is through our website, www.azotic-na.com.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on this Tuesday. We're going to now talk transportation items in last week's budget. But first I want to mention Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. We are joined right now by Greg Northey. He is with Pulse Canada. Greg, great to have you back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, Greg, last week in the budget, there was a lot of attention on fertilizer tariffs, and there was focus and attention on money for dairy research. There also was and some of these didn't have necessarily numbers attached to them, so they get a little bit less profile. It was more, a commitment to do so. There was a number of transportation items or transportation-related items that were in last week's budget. I know that this is something that is very, very much on the minds of Pulse Canada, and a true personal passion of yours as well is transportation. So what do we need to know about the transportation components of this year's budget?
Yeah, there was quite a few transportation items in there. And, budgets often, even if there aren't dollars assigned to it, they will hint at policy direction, which can be really positive for us. And so there's a few items in there that were very more policy, legislative focused around just indicating the way government wants to look or start to do things. And often with these budgets, that's one of the biggest impacts we can see.
I like that. They're pulsy. I like that. Okay, so we got $27.2 million over 5 years starting in 23-24 to Transport Canada to establish a transportation supply chain office which will work with the industry and other orders of government to respond to disruptions and better coordinate action to increase the capacity, efficiency, and reliability of Canada's transportation supply chain infrastructure. Is this, when I first read that, my first reaction, Greg, was, why weren't we doing this already? What's your take on it? What does this mean to you?
Yeah, so this came directly as a recommendation from the National Supply Chain Task Force that published their report last fall. One of the things that they felt would be important was this overarching supply chain office that would bring together different departments within the federal government, as well as ways with industry to address supply chain disruptions. And I think one of the real impetuses for it was when we had our issues at West with the track outages, and all kinds of different departments had to get involved with that and the response to that. And I think the idea is that if you have this one-stop shop, this one office to look at things, that you can maybe start to coordinate action better. Why haven't we had it before? Well, we have a regulator. We have the Canadian Transportation Agency, which is meant to deliver some of this already, as when it comes to particularly the regulated, the railways, and particularly around delivering efficiency and reliability, through a regulated format. But they're never. And obviously we have the Department of Transport Canada, which in a way they have groups within the federal government already that look at this. But this conceptually would be new. Would be crossing the borders of different departments. Okay,
in having some this single entity though needs to have some sway, some swagger's not the right description, but some teeth to be able to try to prevent or enact change to try to fix situations. That's also an important, I would think, would be an important component of something like this.
Yeah, for sure. And it was one of the, when we saw that recommendation in the task force report, that was our initial focus, and that many of the things that we face as far as issues within the supply chain require teeth. They require a regulated backstop. They require, especially when you start to look at the railways, but even in other places. So, so do you need to replicate that? When you start to look at more policy-focused things and, just collaboration or, working or having dialogues with industry, maybe there's a role for this. So, it'll be interesting how it gets set up, what kind of people they put into it. But ultimately, when you really look at deriving change, a lot of it will come still from say, the agency or Transport Canada particularly.
There was also $25 million over 5 years, starting in 23-24, for Transport Canada to work with Statistics Canada to develop transportation supply chain data that will help reduce congestion, make our supply chains more efficient, and inform future infrastructure planning. Is there some overlap here with some of the work the Ag Transport Coalition's been doing, or how do you view this $25 million over 5 years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and it's also coming from existing Transport Canada resources, and so it's not necessarily new funding. It seems to really hint at the need for Transport Canada potentially to work a bit closer with Statistics Canada. So, Statistics Canada right now has a transportation hub where, for instance, we just went through a long process of a regulatory process where railways are meant to provide more data weekly on what's happening in the network. And so that all resides on Statistics Canada. So there already is that connection. But ideally what this is doing is it's pointing to potentially next generation type of metrics, where can you start to look at more detailed metrics around what's happening in the network and look at predictive analytics, or some of the things that Statistics Canada, has the resources to do, and they just simply need to get the data, which Transport Canada has. So, the ATC has been, doing work with Statistics Canada over the past year or so to figure out, what are the kinds of things that the industry has as far as data. How do you work with an agency like that, a government agency, to get to those kind of produce better metrics, more thorough metrics on what's happening in the network. So again, I think this is positive. Anytime you can have Transport Canada working with Stats Canada and around this kind of thing, it's good. Ultimately, though, like with many of these things, we'll see what comes of it.
There also was talk here, Greg, as far as amendments to the Canada Transportation Act to provide Minister of Transport with the authority, and that probably is an important word here, the authority to compel data sharing by shippers accessing federally regulated transportation services. What does that exactly mean?
So essentially what it means is that they would legislate the ability to make a regulation in the Canada Transportation Act. So like we saw with Bill C-49 a few years ago, when they decided that they wanted to compel more data from the railways, the language in the act just said, okay, now you shall make a regulation, and then we went into a 5-year-long regulatory process. So basically what it means is they will signal that they want to regulate data from shippers, and compel it basically, because that's what regulations do. So that seems to be their intention on how they would compel through regulation.
Yeah. Now, is this good for farmers, or are there concerns here?
Yeah, there are concerns here. This is a big undertaking. One of the reasons why you can focus on, say, the railways or the ports or these bodies to get the kind of information you need to improve supply chains is because there's not many of them, right? And so you have 2 railways who handle the vast majority of the traffic. They have all the data of what's happening in the network. So that's where you go for your data. When you talk about shippers, and the reality is this isn't just shippers in the grain sector we're talking about. We're talking about shippers across the spectrum. So many, I dare say thousands of shippers who are shipping things in Canada daily, either importing or exporting. And this idea that you would be compelling data from them. Now, obviously, they would have to compel that data. They would have to be using federally regulated transportation services, which are railways, which particularly for grain are elevators, terminals. So, the focus here on grain is much stronger, let's say, than as far as getting data from specific operations within the grain sector, because other sectors, their mills or whatever aren't necessarily always going to be federally regulated. So this does have a particularly grain-centered focus. And so, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say red flags, but potentially red flags around this on what exactly would they be compelling, where is the actual value for it, how you would get it from from the grain sector. Specifically, when you look at the pulse sector, we have, close to 100 shippers of these products, pulse and special crops, who could be operating, shipping container here, container there. Are they just going to be targeting large shippers? Why would they just be targeting large shippers?
So Greg, who pushed for this?
Well, that's a great question. Similarly, this was something that was in the National Trade, the task force report. So they did hint at something like this idea that increased collaboration could be driven from everyone providing their data to the system. I know that from a shipper group perspective, we certainly weren't pushing for this, because ultimately the performance of the system is driven by, the service provider as opposed to individual shippers. Individual shippers provide data now to their service provider. So there is no mystery around, if you're ordering transportation services from the truck or whatever, from the rail or whatever, you're clearly giving that market signal already. So, we don't necessarily see where the value is going to come from this. But I would say that the precedent has been set. There's a bill right now, C-33, which looks at the Marine Act, where they have very specific language where they would like to compel data from the users of the port, which means the shippers. And so we're seeing it in that act. from seed in this act. So there's clearly a plan here around compelling this kind of data, and it's not fully clear yet how it would be used and what direction this is going to take. So definitely interesting, but something that I think we're going to be watching really closely.
We've got more with Greg Northey of Pulse Canada right after this quick break.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated. But did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on realagriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on realagriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Before we get back to more of my conversation with Greg Northey of Pulse Canada, where we talk about interswitching, tell you what, grow more, risk less. Realize greater yield potential and address zinc deficiency while improving soil health. Soleos Zinc delivers ROI you can count on and is backed with a product guarantee. Try it today. Learn more at soleos.com. That's SOILEOS.com. The other one that I know will get some attention, I'm sure was discussed a lot after it was brought out, was the commitment to introduce amendments to the Canada Transportation Act for a temporary extension on a pilot basis of the interswitching limit in the Prairie provinces to strengthen rail competition. Is this something that Pulse Canada supports?
Yes, absolutely. This was something that Pulse Canada, as well as many in the grain industry, supported this return to extended interswitching. And again, this was in the National Task Force report. So, interesting qualifications here. Temporary pilots, but we'll take it as opposed to not seeing it. In this was, like I said earlier, from a policy direction for a budget, this is quite strong, in that we'll see this happen. We expect there'll be consultations around distance, because it's quite silent on distance as far as what that interswitching distance should be, and also the focus on the Prairie province is interesting, but it's good, and the fact that they recognize that it strengthens rail competition is also good. So, from a policy signal standpoint, this one is quite good to see in the budget.
Overall, Greg, were you happy with the transportation issues that were addressed in the budget, or were there things that were left out that you feel were missed?
Well, there was one last one that I would say was particularly happy, for the Pulse sector, which was the Shipping Conferences Exemption Act. We're launching a review of that, and so that's for us and others in the grain sector, obviously, but we rely on containers quite a lot, and so this is the act that is really focused on how shipping lines function in a competitive basis and how they serve Canada. So this has been a huge driver for us for the past, 3 years probably, around what kind of systems do we need to put in place to bring a bit more competitive oversight to shipping lines? And so this was a big one for us as well. So I would say that with this included, along with the other things, especially with the interswitching, when you look at what you can expect from a budget and what it can direct government to do, this was a pretty good suite of things. Obviously, some things were a bit hesitant about, but from at least an initial policy direction, just recognizing the lack of competition, as well as our focus on issues around marine containers, it was quite good. We were very pleased to see this. It was positive, and clearly that task force report had an impact, and they were listening. At least from government perspective, they were listening to what our priorities were.
Is that transportation task force, is their work done, or is it ongoing?
No, they're done. Yeah, that report, once it got published, they were done. So it was really left in government's hands as to what they took and they didn't take. And there was a lot of recommendations in that report. So, these three, the supply chain office, which may or may not be effective, but certainly we're going to do everything we can to make it effective. And then the interswitching and the Shipping Conferences Exemption Act were all, those were some of the top priorities that we pulled from that report. So it was good. It's good to see.
Okay, great stuff. Hey, Greg, thanks so much for joining us here. Really appreciate it. All the best to you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Last week when we reviewed the budget, we had Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture and Tyler McCann of CAPI on Wednesday's show. And Tyler said it. Sometimes when it comes to budgets, the pieces that get all the attention are the pieces that have the big dollars attached to them. Like in the case of the dairy research, $330 million to deal with milk solids. But you got to dig into some of the finer details of some of these budgets. And I think in this case, the transportation kind of fits into that, where, as Greg just said, it's a component or a bit of a direction on the policy direction the government's going, as opposed to necessarily like a financial number we would associate with the budget. So we'll be following, of course, the transportation changes and the file very, very closely, because it is just... Listen, as an exporting nation, we have to be super, super excellent. We need to punch above our weight when it comes to logistical excellence. Do we do that all the time? Of course not. But we have to going forward. We need to be, as John Stackhouse from RBC said on this show going back over a month ago, Canada needs to be hyper-focused on trade. How do you do that? 1, it's about attitude. 2, it's about making it a priority. Now, there's the deal-making and enforcement component of that, but we have to have the logistics, the infrastructure, and the regulatory framework that is not punishing, but is more creating the opportunity for us to achieve our highest potential when it comes to making our customers abroad happy with great Canadian products. So obviously this is a very, very important discussion for producers, not just in Western Canada, all over the country. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Real Ag Radio right after this.
If farmers know one thing to be true, it's this. There are a lot of factors you can't control. The weather, breakdowns, and a million other variables standing between you and a successful season. But for all the uncertainty, you wouldn't change a thing, because that's farming. And that's why Koch Agronomic Services wants to make life on the farm a bit more predictable. From nutrient management and protection to seed enhancement, get the confidence of being in control. Visit KochAgSolutions.com.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on realagriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio. Hey, tell you what, grow more, risk less. Realize greater yield potential and address zinc deficiency while improving soil health. Soleos Zinc delivers ROI you can count on and is backed with a product guarantee. Try it today. Learn more at Soleos.com. That's SOILEOS.com. Let's get to the top ag news stories of the day, and maybe the coolest story of the day. A very, very proud, I think, Canadian moment. Former Ontario farm kid to orbit the moon. So a former farm kid from southwestern Ontario has been chosen to become the first Canadian astronaut to orbit the moon. NASA and the Canadian Space Agency unveiled the crew for the Artemis II lunar mission, the first human trip to the moon's orbit since the last Apollo mission in 1972 at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas on Monday. Very cool. This story is from the Globe and Mail, and of course, it's been broadcast. All the major news outlets, I'm down in the U.S. right now, and it's all over the news here as well. But from a Canadian perspective, super, super cool. Very proud. Yeah, and a farm kid, right? Applying some of that work around the farm to going into space. So the Canadian representative on the crew will be Jeremy Hansen, who grew up on a farm near Ailsa Craig, northwest of London, hometown of Steve Twinstra. That's right. He was on the show a couple weeks ago. As an astronaut who grew up on a farm in southern Ontario, the link between space and agriculture really interests me, he wrote in a Facebook post back in 2021. So congratulations to Jeremy Hansen, Canadian, going to the moon. How is it possible we haven't been back to the moon's orbit since 1972? That is actually in itself kind of amazing. Time flies. I wasn't even around in 1972, but I would have guessed, I would have taken the over. I would have said we've been back since, but yeah, space, the final frontier, as William Shatner says. Latest round of CFIA livestock traceability regulations up for comment. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is continuing with its updating of the health of animals regulations regarding livestock transport and traceability. This round of proposed changes builds on the 2020 changes that introduced new feed, water, rest, and transport manifest requirements, among other changes. Okay, so there are four main goals of this round of changes. To bring goats and cervids, such as farm deer, into the regulation, shorten the reporting period to 7 days, to make the use of premise IDs and animal movement reporting mandatory, and to better track domestic movement of livestock. The consultation period ends on June 16th of this year. The 2023 U.S. winter wheat crop is coming into the spring in even worse shape than it was last fall as it headed into dormancy. This story from GrainFox. In its first weekly crop progress report for the 2023 growing season on Monday, the USDA pegged the nationwide winter wheat crop at just 28% good to excellent as of Sunday. That's actually down 2 points from last year and 6 points below the USDA's late November rating of 34% good to excellent. It also fell short of the average pre-report trade guess of 31% good to excellent. More than one-third of the crop was rated in poor to very poor condition, identical to last year, but up from 26% at the end of November. Of course, drought has taken a heavy toll on the winter wheat crop in the Southern Plains. With the November rating the lowest since 2012, with little snow cover this winter, the crop was also buffeted by extremely cold temperatures. And that's very, very self-explanatory. Mother Nature, stop. Please stop. Another cool story, Canadians doing good things abroad. Canadian Steve Hawkins, currently ADAMA's Senior Vice President of Americas, will assume the role of President and Chief Executive Officer effective May 1st for the global organization. Hawkins succeeds Mr. Ignacio Dominguez, who has elected to retire from the company after serving in a series of senior roles at ADAMA for more than a decade. Hawkins has been in his current role since 2021. Hawkins has spent his entire career in agriculture, beginning in sales with Growmark in Canada before joining one of the Syngenta's legacy companies, ICI Canada. I actually have some business cards that have ICI Canada. Not me personally. I didn't work at ICI, but I had friends and some customers that did when I was in the seed business. He did that 3 decades ago. He has held a number of senior roles during the time with the company, including head of commercial operations for North America corn and soy and country head for Japan and South Korea, among others. Hawkins holds a diploma in agriculture and an executive MBA in food and agribusiness, both from Ontario's Agricultural College at the University of Guelph, and has a bachelor's degree in administrative studies from Toronto's York University. So congratulations to Steve Hawkins. Louis Dreyfus Company will stop exporting Russian grain from July 1st, or as of July 1st. The group said on Monday, joining other global merchants in dropping activities in the world's biggest wheat exporting countries. That story according to Reuters. Most international grain traders have stopped new investment in Russia following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine last year, but continued shipping Russian wheat. And it's important to remember here that somebody's going to own these assets. It's not like Louis Dreyfus is leaving Russia and they're taking all of the infrastructure with them. Somebody is going to buy it. Now, that could be a Russian-controlled organization, or, which won't surprise me with all these examples of Cargill, Viterra, now Louis Dreyfus, ADM you would think is going to make this decision too, China. It won't surprise me if it's China that will end up owning a lot of this infrastructure, which plays into the narrative, whether it's true or false, it plays into the narrative that at the end of the day, all of this just makes Russia more subservient to China in the long term. Saputo to sell Aussie milk processing plants. So Saputo Inc. has signed a deal to sell 2 milk processing plants in Australia to supermarket giant Coles Group Limited for about $95 million. The Canadian dairy giant says the fresh milk processing facilities are in the Australian states of Victoria and New South Wales. That story is from the Winnipeg Free Press. Yesterday, there was a press release, sorry. Ooh, boy. A press release from the Canadian Canola Growers Association saying that they've issued over $300 million in cash advances, providing more than 1,500 farmers across Western Canada with working capital to help get the growing season off to a productive start. Through CCGA, farmers can access advances on over 50 commodities, including field crops, large and small livestock, organic crops and livestock, and honey. Farmers can apply for a cash advance up to $250,000 interest-free and to a maximum of $1 million. The interest-bearing portion is charged on an interest rate of prime less 0.75%. We also saw in the budget, it includes funding to increase the interest-free component for 2023 cash advances from $250,000 to $350,000. McDonald's is temporarily closing its U.S. offices this week as it prepares to inform corporate employees about layoffs undertaken by the burger giant as a part of a broader company restructuring. McDonald's last week told U.S. employees and some international staff that they should work from home from Monday through Wednesday so it can deliver staffing decisions virtually. The company declined to comment on Sunday on the number of employees being laid off. Wow, McDonald's doing some restructuring. Go home, wait for a Zoom call, and just hope you get the right link. Dude, what link are you at? What room have you been invited to? Oh, boy, I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. Some economic news. The Canadian dollar strengthened to a nearly 7-week high against the U.S. counterpart on Monday as oil prices surged, and Bank of Canada survey showed that fewer firms expect a recession than was previously the case. So the price of oil, one of Canada's, of course, biggest major exports, settled 6.3% higher at $84.93 a barrel as the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC Plus, jolted markets with the plans to cut production. The Canadian dollar was trading 0.8% higher at $134.12 per greenback, or what makes more sense to many of us. We talk in the inverse, which is the Canadian dollar trading at 74.56 U.S. cents. Its biggest single-day advance since February 10th and its strongest level since February 16th. Adding to the support for the loonie, the Bank of Canada no longer looks like an outlier after it paused its interest rate hiking campaign in March. That's right, Bank of Canada was kind of ahead of the rest of the G7 when it came to pausing and kind of looking a little bit deeper into how the data progressed. Investors have been dialing back bets for additional tightening from other central banks, including the Federal Reserve, after global banking sector stress emerged last month. Speaking of that, the U.S. banking crisis is ongoing and will affect for years to come, according to JP Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon. He was quoted as saying, "The current crisis is not over yet, and even when it is behind us, there will be repercussions from it for years to come." He wrote this in his 43-page annual message covering a range of topics from JP Morgan's performance to geopolitics and regulation. That's all the time we have for the show today. Of course, I would love your feedback. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or what I would really love is to hear from you on our Real Ag feedback line. You just dial the number 855-776-6147. You dial the number, press the number 3, and you leave me a message. Would love to hear your voice with that passion and thought, whether you agree or disagree with something I have said or a guest has said. We want to hear your perspective. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio, and we'll, of course, chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of Real Ag Radio, brought to you by high-performing new carbine insecticide from FMC. New carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, and extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer today.